Where have all the men gone in the church? Or are they actually gone? Stay tuned, because we're going to dig into this and find out what the truth is. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss stories the mainstream media ignores that can actually impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey. Chaplain Warren and Chaplain Nan are your hosts, and we're glad to have you with us. Welcome back to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours. We're certainly glad to have you with us. Today we're going to look at something that's just popped up out of nowhere, it seems like, because for some unexplained reason, the topic of men not being in the church has been all over the place in my various news sources. And so I guess I've taken that as a hint that perhaps that is something that we should talk about. So we're going to dip our toe into the troubled waters and see what we can learn about the issue of men not being in the church. And so the first thing we want to do is test that hypothesis, that men are in fact really missing from the church. After all, there's very little that should be trusted in the media without some verification. Would you agree?
500%.
Okay. All right. Yeah, me too. So anyway, to do this, we're going to rely on some fairly trustworthy sources that we use from time to time, and we'll provide links to those sources in our show notes. And one very good source of statistics in the church area is Pew Research, and they have a comprehensive 2023-2024 polling story about Christianity that they've published. And so we'll provide a link to that in the show notes. Now to start diving in, their polling shows that 59% of men in the United States identify as Christians. And you can break that down further, 23% as Protestant evangelicals, 19% as Roman Catholics, and then some minor percentages of other denominations. Interestingly, that leaves us with 31% of men religiously unaffiliated. That is, they're either atheists, maybe agnostics, or they're just nothing. Now, the survey shows that 34% of Christian men say religion is very important to them. 39% say, not so much. 12% of Christian men participate in weekly prayer, Bible study, or fellowship groups, and 75% seldom do. 24% of Christian men attend church weekly. 51% seldom go to church, which means 49% of men do not attend church with any frequency at all. Now, if you find those numbers a little bit hard to follow, let's sum it up a little bit by saying that if 59% of men are Christians and 24% of those Christian men attend church weekly, then overall what we're saying is that 14% of men are in the church on any given Sunday. 14%. Not a whole lot. Now, we can go over and look at the same type of statistics with women, and what we find is that 66% of women are Christians. That's a little bit more than the men. And 26% of women attend weekly, which is also a little bit more than men, which suggests overall that 18% of women are in the church on a given Sunday. Okay. Again, a little bit more than men. So again, if this is kind of hard to follow, let's talk about where these statistics leave us. And I think one conclusion that's pretty obvious is that neither men nor women are really going to church very much.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that all the titles on the news stories are about the men, but not the women. But that's maybe the subject for another episode. If you assume that the adult population of the United States is currently about 260 million people, that's the adult population. And if you further assume that about the population is roughly split 50-50 men and women, and that's not probably exact, but it's close, then what we're saying is on any given Sunday or during any given week, about 18 million men and 23 million women are attending church, for a total of 41 million people out of that adult population of 260 million.
Wow.
Now, just to try to determine how accurate this result might be, Gallup has done a similar survey for 2025 that suggests 52 million adults attend church weekly. And so, given the likely margins of error in the Pew Research study and in the Gallup study, those two results are statistically identical, or they're really close to it. Pew Research leads us to believe there's 41 million. Gallup Research leads us to believe there's 52 million attending church. My guess, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of those two numbers. Okay. So what we've seen is the overall problem is not just men not attending church, but it's also not women. And we can take that a step further and say families aren't attending church. And so that might be the most critical factor of all. Now, if you try to dig in and try to find reasons why the church has been declining for the last 40 years and it's gotten to the place where it is, you'll find all kinds of reasons. From, well, it's because retail stores are staying open on Sundays. Well, that might be part of it. Or there are lots of sporting events on Sundays, and yeah, that could be part of it too. And there are a lot more recreational opportunities on Sundays, which is no doubt true. And then there's just kind of this unnamed social drift from the importance of church. And then, of course, the issues of sexual abuse scandals and things like that. But I think in addition to those things, we have to talk about the biggest reason for dropping church attendance, and that is or was the COVID pandemic. If you look at a graph, you can go online, it's easy to find. If you can look at a graph of church attendance over, say, the last 40 years, you know, it's a gradual negative slope, you know, probably 3 to 5% losses per year, that type of thing. And then when you get to COVID, you know, it drops like a stone. And yes, it has recovered from that, not totally, but it has recovered to a certain extent, but it hasn't returned to where it was pre-COVID, and the slope of the curve now seems to be a little bit steeper than it was before COVID. And this is not even talking about getting into the weeds of which churches have suffered the most. And we know for a fact that it's the mainline denominations which have suffered the most. And that, in fact, in many non-denominational churches, they've reversed that. They're actually growing. But the loss in the mainline denominations, including the Roman Catholic Church, exceeds the growth in the non-denominationals, and so overall the growth is still falling. And so what is it that happened in COVID that caused this tremendous drop? Yes, the churches were closed, so that's a factor, but the recovery took a long time, 2 years or so, and like I say, it never got back to where it was. And I think there are some things that account for that. And that is, when the government told churches to close, they clicked their heels and closed. And they closed at a time when people needed assurance. People were scared. People were unsure what was going on. And they needed some source of assurance, which should have been the church. But the church was closed. And that horrific behavior signaled to people that, well, the church, I guess, is just as non-essential as the government claimed it to be. And it very much exposed the hypocrisy of proclaiming from the pulpit what a mighty God we have, what a mighty God we serve, and then having the leadership behaving as cowards in the face of a virus. And so the church, of all institutions, got it completely wrong with its response to COVID. And so that trust in the institution hasn't returned. And nowhere has the church confessed its wrongdoing. Nowhere has the church repented of its behavior. And nowhere has the church apologized to the faithful and resolved to never do this again. And so this and all the other reasons we've talked about, I believe, have had grave consequences for the institutional church. And so in our next episode, we're going to mainly focus on why the men are not going to church. Yes, the women aren't either, but we're going to focus on the men. And why is that? Because there's a long-standing theorem, I guess, and Chaplain Nan can expound on this a little bit. There's a long-standing theorem or sense that if the men are in the church, there's life in the church. And where the men are, the women and the children will follow. So I'm sure you have a few words you can say on that one.
I probably could talk a long time about that. It's a theory. So maybe there's a more diplomatic way so nobody get ruffled about the women following the men thing. But it's almost like a dynamic. And you can go anywhere. It does not just church. You can go to anything. And as soon as the men start dropping off from whatever that organization or entity or endeavor is, for some reason, it just slowly peters out. Wherever they are, and the more that they are present, the more sort of fortified it is and strong and alive and moving and doing, and I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it's just through sheer observation over the years. But for sure, as they leave, it doesn't take long, and then all you have is white hair, and then all you have is blue hair, and then it closes its doors, kind of in a way. And it's very sad to me because I could talk about it a lot. Back to your original thing, and that's why, with the numbers, I think there's so much more to dive into the numbers. And just for people listening, Chaplain Warren is a math major. He's a scientist. I am a remedial math, as in twice remedial math student. So numbers aren't really my thing, but they're facts. And I think the more you tear apart the facts, the more you can see like clusters or see coincidences or why something might be. And I think COVID was the great excuse for everybody to stop going to church. Thought when you started sharing the data was how joyful it is. What was the original number? Is 50 what percent of men identify as Christian?
59%.
My point is we have over 50% of males who believe in Jesus Christ by saying they're Christian. And way before COVID was the drop in, began that whole distinction between my relationship with God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and my relationship with this organization I attend. And became, I think it was a very slow, quiet, like the fog moving in. By the time COVID hit, people still believe in Jesus Christ. They may not read the Bible every day or even at all, but they don't feel that necessity to plug into religion, or, as you quoted, an institutional church, an organized church. So when COVID hit, a lot of people got very creative, especially in the home church group, and you can talk about that as well. But so there's a lot of things in play, but COVID to me was just the excuse to sort of finally unwrap what was already happening. And on top of it, clearly demonstrating that part of the reason for that slow fog coming in of people being so disengaged from worship church life was down to leadership, very poor leadership, so that by the time it was time for them to show their leadership, they said to the world, think about it, worshiping the Lord your God, coming together and acknowledging that God is less important than your grocery shopping, which was allowed. And we will acquiesce to that difference. That one is necessary. You must have food to eat, so you must go to the grocery store, and we will make that available. But you do not need to go and worship the Lord your God, much less if you're sacramental, receive the sacraments. So, there's like a whole plethora of things to talk about that. So and then the women thing, there's like a whole other ball game. But I am very encouraged by the fact that people still believe in Jesus Christ, and he is what it's about. It's not about the building, it's about Jesus.
So all of that is true, and all of that contributes to the overall effect of decline. And to bring it back to the central thing that we've uncovered in this episode is that, the men aren't there, but neither are the women, and by extension, neither are the families. And so if we're going to move forward with this hypothesis that if the men are in the church, there is life in the church, and the women and the children will follow. And so in our next episode, we'll talk about the things that account for the men not being there. And I think there'll be some pretty clear reasons, pretty clear markers, and probably some lessons in there that the church and other institutions could learn from if they want to indeed bring the men back into their fellowship. So that's where we'll go next time, and we look forward to you being there with us.
And maybe we'll have a surprise for you.
All right. Take care. God bless. Thank you for being with us today. Just remember, God is in control, and we know how the story ends.